At my husband's funeral, his mom opened a folder. "Secret will," she said. When I heard my sister's name, the whole room stopped breathing. Between rosaries and whispers, one line on that paper set off every alarm. In Louisiana, not every promise stands, and some truths don't stay buried. After that night, nothing in our family was the same. Y'all, I never thought I'd be sitting here at this little cafe table on Magazine Street, telling you this story over chicory coffee and beignets. But here we are. 3 weeks ago, my whole world fell apart, and I'm still trying to piece together what the hell happened. You know how sometimes life just sucker punches you when you least expect it? Well, honey, that's exactly what happened to me. David died on a Tuesday morning in early October. Just like that. 45 years old, healthy as a horse 1 minute, gone the next. He was up on our roof in Metairie, cleaning out the gutters from all those oak leaves Hurricane Francine dumped on us back in September. You know how it is here. Those live oaks are beautiful until storm season. Then they turn your yard into a brown carpet that clogs everything up. I was inside making coffee, getting ready for another day teaching 2nd grade at Bonnabel Elementary. Had the morning news on, watching them talk about how the Saints were looking good for Sunday's game against the Falcons. David was excited about that. We always had the whole family over for Saints games, made our famous jambalaya, got everybody together to yell at the TV like that was going to help Drew Brees throw better passes. Next thing I know, I hear this terrible crash outside. Thought maybe a branch fell or something. But when I looked out the kitchen window, there was David lying in our driveway, not moving. Our neighbor, Mrs. Boudreau, was already running over from next door. That woman has ears like a hawk, I swear. The paramedics worked on him for 20 minutes right there in front of our little Creole cottage. 20 minutes of CPR, those electric paddle things, everything they could do. But his heart just gave out. Massive heart attack, they said later. Never saw it coming, 15 years of marriage, and I thought we were solid, you know? Sure, we had our problems like everybody else. David was stressed about work. I was dealing with Mama's health issues down in Thibodaux. Money was always tight with the construction business being seasonal. But nothing that couldn't be worked out over some coffee and conversation on our front porch, watching the streetcar rumble by on Carrollton Avenue. The whole thing happened so fast, my head was spinning. One day we're talking about maybe driving over to Lafayette for the festival's Acadians next weekend, planning to get some good boudin and listen to some Zydeco music, and the next I'm at Bultman Funeral Home on Veterans Boulevard, picking out caskets and trying to figure out how to bury my husband. That's when Miss Eleanor swooped in like some kind of grief vulture. David's mama never liked me much, not since he brought me home from LSU 20 years ago when we were both young and stupid and head over heels in love. She always thought her precious boy could do better than some girl from Lafourche Parish whose daddy worked the oil rigs and whose mama cleaned houses for rich folks in Thibodaux. But grief makes you vulnerable, makes you accept help from people you normally wouldn't trust with your grocery list. When Miss Eleanor offered to handle all the funeral arrangements, coordinate with Father Martinez at St. Christopher's Church, even organize the traditional bereavement meal afterwards, I said yes. Figured she was just being a good Catholic mother, taking care of family when tragedy strikes the way we do here in Louisiana. Should have known better. Should have remembered that woman never did anything without an agenda. But when you're drowning in grief and shock, you grab onto whatever life preserver gets thrown your way, even if it's got hooks in it. The wake was beautiful. I'll give her that much credit. Had David laid out proper in our living room like his daddy before him, like we've been doing in Louisiana families for generations. Whole neighborhood came by over those 3 days. Mrs. Boudreau brought her famous Monday red beans and rice even though it was Wednesday. The Trahans from down the street showed up with enough jambalaya to feed half of Jefferson Parish. Even got some of David's co-workers from Broussard Construction showing up after their shifts, still in their work boots and hard hats, paying their respects. That meant a lot to me, seeing how much they cared about David. He treated those boys like family, always made sure they got paid on time even when clients were slow with their checks, gave them bonuses at Christmas when jobs went well. My sister Sarah flew in from Houston that first day after David died. Haven't seen much of her since she moved away 4 years ago after her messy divorce from that no-good husband of hers. She was all tears and hugs when she walked through my front door, telling me how sorry she was, how David was like a brother to her, how she couldn't believe he was gone. Marie, "Honey, I'm so sorry," she kept saying, holding me while I cried on her shoulder. David was such a good man. Y'all were so perfect together. I don't know how you're gonna get through this, but I'm here for you. Whatever you need, real supportive, you know? Or so I thought at the time. Sarah always was good at saying the right things when people were watching. Growing up, she could charm the skin off a snake when Mama and Daddy were around, then turn mean as a water moccasin the minute they left the room. But I was grateful for the help. Having family there made everything feel a little less overwhelming. Sarah knew how to handle the church ladies who kept bringing casseroles, knew how to redirect the nosy neighbors who wanted all the details about David's death, knew how to make small talk with Father Martinez about the funeral mass. The funeral itself was packed, standing room only at St. Christopher's. David knew everybody in this parish, seemed like. 20 years of construction work in the area meant he'd fixed roofs, built additions, renovated kitchens for half the congregation. Father Martinez did a beautiful service, talked about David's generous heart, how he'd help anybody move furniture or fix their front steps without asking for a dime in return. David Broussard was the kind of man who made our community stronger, Father Martinez said from the pulpit. When Hurricane Ida knocked down Mrs. Ledette's fence 2 years ago, who showed up the next morning with lumber and tools? When the Guidrys needed help moving their elderly father into assisted living, who volunteered his truck and his strong back? David never hesitated to lend a hand to his neighbors. I was crying so hard I could barely see, but I felt proud too. My husband was a good man and everybody knew it. Miss Eleanor sat right there in the front pew next to me, dabbing her eyes with tissues, playing the grieving mother perfectly. Sarah was on my other side, squeezing my hand every time I started sobbing too loud. After we buried David at St. Louis Cemetery No. 3, couldn't afford one of those fancy above-ground tombs, so we had to settle for a regular plot. Everybody came back to Miss Eleanor's big house on Veterans Boulevard for the traditional meal. That's how we do things here when somebody dies. You feed people when they come to mourn with you, show them hospitality even in your grief. Her dining room table was covered with enough food to feed a second-line parade. Casseroles, potato salad, jambalaya, red beans and rice, cornbread, king cake from Hadel's Bakery even though it wasn't quite Mardi Gras season yet. About 6 different desserts, too. Bread pudding, pralines, pecan pie, even some of those fancy macarons from Magazine Street. People were sharing David's stories, laughing through their tears the way you do at Louisiana funerals. His buddy Mike from the construction crew talked about how David once drove all the way to Baton Rouge at 2 a.m. to help him fix his truck when it broke down on I-10. My cousin Janet told everybody about the time David spent his whole Saturday helping her elderly neighbor Mrs. Arsenault rebuild her front steps after Hurricane Ida. Wouldn't take a penny for the lumber or his time. That's just how David was, Janet said, wiping her eyes with her napkin. Always putting other people first. Always ready to help out when folks needed it. Even some of the church ladies were sharing memories. Mrs. Landry talked about how David fixed their church hall roof for free after that bad storm last spring. How he brought his whole crew out on a Saturday morning and wouldn't hear of charging the parish for the work. I was actually starting to feel a little better, you know? Surrounded by all that love and support. All those people who genuinely cared about David and wanted to remember him properly. Thinking maybe I could get through this nightmare after all, with my family and friends helping me heal. That warm feeling lasted about 30 minutes. Miss Eleanor stood up in her fancy dining room, cleared her throat real loud like she was about to make some kind of important announcement. "Y'all, I need everyone's attention for just a minute." She had this thick manila folder in her hands, the kind lawyers use for important papers. My stomach dropped immediately. Something about her tone wasn't right. Too formal, too prepared, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. The whole room went quiet. Maybe 30 people standing around with their paper plates full of jambalaya and potato salad, all looking at Miss Eleanor like she was about to read from the Gospel of St. Matthew. "My son was always thinking ahead," she continued, opening that folder with deliberate ceremony. "David was real responsible about these things, always worried about taking care of the people he loved. He made sure his affairs were in order, even wrote up a proper will without telling anybody about it. Now, this didn't make a lick of sense to me. David and I had talked about making wills plenty of times over the years, especially after we bought the house and started the business. But we kept putting it off the way young couples do, always thinking we had plenty of time to worry about death and inheritance and all that morbid stuff. I found this in David's desk drawer when I was going through his papers," Miss Eleanor said, holding up what looked like official legal documents. "Everything properly notarized and witnessed, just like it should be." Father Martinez looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Some of the older ladies in the room started whispering behind their hands. I could feel people staring at me, waiting to see my reaction. "David was real specific about what he wanted," Miss Eleanor continued, unfolding the papers like she was handling the Declaration of Independence. "He took care of everything, made sure there wouldn't be any confusion or fighting after he was gone." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Why wouldn't David tell me about writing a will? We shared everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, even knew each other's Facebook passwords. Making important legal decisions without discussing them first wasn't like him at all. Miss Eleanor cleared her throat again and started reading in her loud, clear voice that carried to every corner of that dining room. "I, David Paul Broussard, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my last will and testament, witnessed and notarized on the 15th day of August, in the year of our Lord 2025. August 15th. That was just 6 weeks ago. We'd been getting ready for Labor Day weekend, talking about maybe driving over to Gulf Shores for a few days if David could get caught up on his current job. He seemed normal, happy even, excited about the long weekend. Why would he write a will without telling me? Miss Eleanor went through some legal mumbo-jumbo about David being of sound mind and understanding the nature of his actions, then got to the meat of it. The part that would change my life forever. To my beloved wife, Marie-Catherine Broussard, I leave my personal effects, including clothing, jewelry, and sentimental items, along with the contents of our joint checking account at Whitney Bank. Okay, that sounded reasonable enough at first. But then I started thinking about what she wasn't mentioning. Our house, David's construction business, his life insurance policy, the savings account we'd been building for the past 8 years. Why was she emphasizing contents of our joint checking account like that was some kind of generous gift? We only kept about $3,000 in checking, just enough to cover monthly bills and groceries. All our real money was in savings, David's 401k from his previous job, and that life insurance policy we'd been paying on for 10 years. Miss Eleanor paused dramatically, looking around the room like she was savoring this moment. To my dear sister-in-law, Sarah Elizabeth Landry, who has been such a source of comfort and support during these difficult recent years, who has shown unwavering loyalty and understanding during times of marital strain. Marital strain? What the hell was she talking about? David and I had been arguing more lately, sure, but that was just normal married couple stuff. Money stress, work pressure, my mama's health problems. Nothing that qualified as marital strain, serious enough to mention in a damn will. I leave my house and property located at 2247 Metairie Road. My construction business, including all equipment, tools, outstanding contracts, and business accounts. My life insurance policy through Allstate Insurance Company with a benefit of $200,000, and all remaining financial assets including savings accounts, investment accounts, and retirement funds. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a mosquito buzz in that suddenly airless dining room. 30 people holding paper plates and plastic cups of sweet tea, all staring at me like I was some kind of zoo animal. Everything we'd built together over 15 years of marriage. The house I'd been paying half the mortgage on for 8 years. The business David started from nothing, that I'd helped build by keeping the books, answering phones, dealing with difficult customers. The life insurance policy that was supposed to take care of me if something happened to him. All of it going to my sister, my own flesh and blood. Sarah made this little gasping sound, covered her mouth with her hand like she was shocked. Oh my God, David did all this for me? I had no idea he was thinking about me like this. This is incredible. But something wasn't right about her reaction. The surprise looked fake, rehearsed. Like when we were kids and she'd break something, then act all innocent when Mama asked who did it. That same wide-eyed, butter wouldn't melt expression that fooled our parents but never fooled me. Miss Eleanor was watching me real close, like she was enjoying every second of my shock and humiliation, waiting to see if I'd break down crying, or start screaming, or just collapse right there on her hardwood floors. The whole room was watching me too. Some folks looked genuinely confused, others uncomfortable, like they'd walked into the middle of a family fight they didn't want any part of. A few of the older church ladies were whispering behind their hands, probably already planning how they'd tell this story to their bridge clubs tomorrow. There's got to be some mistake, I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strange and hollow like it was coming from somebody else's throat. David wouldn't. We never talked about anything like this. We never discussed leaving everything to Sarah. Hell, we never even discussed making a will in the first place. Miss Eleanor shook her head slowly, like she was dealing with a child who couldn't understand simple instructions. Marie, honey, I know this is hard to accept. Nobody likes surprises when they're grieving. But David was very clear about his intentions. Look here. She held up the papers, pointed to a signature at the bottom of the last page. That's his handwriting clear as day. And there's the notary stamp from Whitney Bank on Veterans Boulevard, dated August 15th, like I said. Everything legal and proper. I stared at that signature, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It did look like David's handwriting, the same messy scrawl he used to sign checks and birthday cards. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. Marie, Sarah said, coming over to put her arm around my shoulders. I'm as shocked as you are about all this. I swear on Mama's grave I didn't know David was planning anything like this. I had no idea he was even thinking about wills or inheritance or any of that. Her voice had that fake quality again, like when she used to lie about staying out past curfew in high school. Too sincere, too dramatic. And why was she swearing on Mama's grave? Sarah only did that when she was telling her biggest lies. Maybe we should discuss this privately, I said, looking around at all those faces watching us like we were some kind of reality TV show. This is family business. We don't need to hash this out in front of everybody. Nonsense, Miss Eleanor said firmly, waving her hand dismissively. David wanted his wishes known to everybody who cared about him. He was very specific about that in his conversations with me. Said he didn't want any confusion or fighting after he was gone. Wanted everything out in the open. Conversations with her? What conversations? David barely talked to his mother except on holidays and birthdays. Said she was too judgmental, too interfering. When did they start having heart-to-heart talks about his will? Father Martinez cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps this would be better discussed with a lawyer present. These matters can be very complicated, and emotions are running high right now. Nobody should make any hasty decisions while they're grieving. Father, this is all perfectly legal, Miss Eleanor said, her voice getting sharp. David had everything done proper, with witnesses and notarization and all the legal requirements. I've already spoken with my lawyer, Raymond Trosclair, and he confirmed the will is completely valid under Louisiana law. Her lawyer. Not our family lawyer, not David's business lawyer. Her personal attorney, the one who'd been handling her affairs since Mr. Broussard died 5 years ago. That's when I started getting really suspicious. David had never mentioned talking to any lawyers about wills. And why would he use his mother's lawyer instead of Buddy Thibodeau, who'd been handling our business paperwork and house closing? I need to see that whole will, I said, extending my hand toward the folder. Not just the parts you want to read out loud, the entire document. Miss Eleanor hesitated for just a second, then handed over the papers like she was doing me some kind of big favor. Course you can read it, honey. David wouldn't have wanted any secrets between family members. I spread those legal documents out on her dining room table, right next to the leftover jambalaya and cornbread, and started reading every single word. The more I read, the sicker I felt. According to this will, David believed our marriage had encountered irreconcilable difficulties over the past several years, and that Sarah had provided essential emotional and personal support during a period of significant marital crisis and personal turmoil. Marital crisis? What goddamn marital crisis? Sure, we'd been arguing more lately about money and work stress and my mama's health problems, but that's just regular married life stuff. Every couple goes through rough patches. That doesn't mean your marriage is in crisis. And what kind of emotional and personal support had Sarah been providing my husband? She lived 4 hours away in Houston, worked as a dental hygienist, barely called except on birthdays and Christmas. When exactly was she having all these deep, supportive conversations with David? That's when I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. A specific mention buried in the legal language about the property located at 1247 Baronne Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans. What the hell is this about Baronne Street? I asked, pointing to that line with a shaking finger. David doesn't own any property on Baronne Street. We've never even talked about buying anything in the French Quarter. Miss Eleanor and Sarah exchanged a look. Quick, barely a second, but I caught it. The kind of look people share when they've been caught in a lie and need to get their stories straight. That was going to be a surprise, Sarah said after a pause that lasted too long. David bought that little cottage as an investment property. He was planning to fix it up and flip it, make some extra money for y'all's future. With what money? I demanded, my voice getting louder. Our savings account has had the same balance for months. I see every penny that comes in and goes out of our business and personal accounts. David couldn't buy a snowball in July without me knowing about it. He took out a loan against the construction business, Miss Eleanor said quickly. Didn't want to worry you with all the financial details while you were dealing with your mama's cancer treatments. None of this was making sense. David told me everything about the business, which jobs were coming up, which clients were slow to pay their bills, when he needed to buy new equipment or hire extra workers. He wouldn't take out a major loan against our business without discussing it with me first. We were partners in everything, always had been. I want to see the deed to this Barone Street property, I said, standing up from the table. And I want to see the loan paperwork. And while we're at it, I want to see David's phone records for the past 6 months. Sarah jumped up so fast she knocked over her packet of Sweet and Low, sending artificial sweetener spilling across Miss Eleanor's good tablecloth. Marie, you're being paranoid. David loved you, everybody knows that. But he also cared about me, about making sure I'd be okay after my divorce left me with nothing. Is it really so hard to believe he wanted to help take care of me too? By leaving me with nothing? I shot back, my grief starting to transform into pure rage. By giving you our house, our business, everything we built together over 15 years? By leaving his wife with $3,000 in checking and whatever clothes fit in my closet? You'll be fine, Miss Eleanor said, starting to clear dishes from the table like this conversation was over. You're still young, you got that teaching job at Bonnabelle Elementary. You can take care of yourself just fine. Young? I'm 43 years old with a mortgage payment of $1,800 a month, car payments, credit card debt from when David's business was slow last winter. That teaching job pays $35,000 a year before taxes, barely enough to cover basic living expenses, much less maintain the lifestyle David and I had built together. I'm calling a lawyer, I announced, grabbing my purse from the kitchen counter. A real lawyer who understands Louisiana succession law, not some family friend who's been feeding y'all bad legal advice. Sarah grabbed my arm as I headed for the door. Marie, please don't make this ugly. David's barely cold in his grave. Can't we just accept his wishes and try to move forward as a family? I jerked my arm away from her grip, hard enough that she stumbled backward. Family? You want to talk to me about family? I'm his wife, Sarah. I'm his next of kin, his legal heir, his partner in everything. Not you. I drove straight from Miss Eleanor's house to Buddy Thibodeau's law office on Causeway Boulevard, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. Buddy had handled David's business incorporation 3 years ago and our house closing, back in 2017, so he knew our financial situation better than anybody. His secretary, Mrs. Comeau, said he was with a client when I walked in, but when I told her about the will and everything that had happened at the bereavement meal, she squeezed me in between appointments. Marie, Cher, I'm so sorry for your loss, Buddy said, giving me a big hug when I walked into his office. David was a good man, one of the best, always paid his bills on time, treated his workers fair, never tried to cut corners on his contracts. Now, what's this about some kind of will situation? I showed him Miss Eleanor's papers, told him the whole story from beginning to end. About the secret will, about everything going to Sarah, about the mysterious property on Barone Street that David supposedly bought without telling me. Buddy's face got darker and darker as he read through the documents, occasionally making little grunting sounds that didn't seem good. He pulled out a magnifying glass to examine the signatures and notary stamps, made some notes on his legal pad. Marie, I got some real good news and some real bad news for you, he finally said, leaning back in his leather chair. Which one you want first? Give me the bad news straight up. I've had enough surprises for one day. Bad news is, your sister and mother-in-law have definitely been lying to you about some things. This will mention property and financial assets that don't match anything I know about David's actual situation. And some of these details about marital problems and emotional support. Well, that suggests they know more about David's personal life than they're letting on. My heart sank into my stomach. I'd been hoping Buddy would take one look at those papers and tell me the whole thing was an obvious fake, some kind of mistake that could be cleared up with a phone call. And the good news? For the first time since I'd walked into his office, Buddy smiled. Good news is, this whole will ain't worth the paper it's printed on. It's completely invalid under Louisiana law. And anybody who told your mother-in-law otherwise either doesn't know succession law or was deliberately misleading her. What do you mean, invalid? Marie, Louisiana is a community property state with some of the strongest forced heirship laws in the country. A husband can't just decide to leave everything to his sister-in-law and cut out his surviving spouse. The law protects widows and widowers from exactly this kind of situation. I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in 3 days. So, the house is still mine? Half that house was always yours. You've been paying the mortgage right along with David for 8 years. The other half passes to you automatically as his surviving spouse unless he specifically devised it to someone else, and even then, you got legal rights that can't be taken away. Buddy opened up a thick law book, pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. See, under Louisiana Civil Code Article 890, a surviving spouse has a legal usufruct over community property that can't be defeated by a will. And Article 2315 establishes your rights as a forced heir to a portion of David's separate property. Explain that in English, buddy. It means David couldn't give away your half of community property even if he wanted to, and he couldn't leave you with nothing from his separate property either. Louisiana law requires him to leave you at least a minimum portion of everything he owned. But what about the business? And the life insurance? Construction business was started during y'all's marriage with community funds, right? That makes it community property, half yours automatically. And if David named you as beneficiary on that life insurance policy, which I'm betting he did when y'all first bought it, then that money comes to you regardless of what any will says. I was starting to feel hope for the first time since this nightmare began. So what do I do now? First thing, we file a petition with the 24th Judicial District Court to open David's succession. That's the legal process for settling a dead person's estate in Louisiana. Second, we demand a complete accounting of all his assets and debts, bank records, business records, property deeds, insurance policies, everything. Buddy made some more notes on his legal pad. Third, we contest this bogus will and assert your rights as surviving spouse under Louisiana law. And fourth, we find out exactly what's been going on with your sister and mother-in-law, because something definitely stinks about this whole situation. How long will all this take? Depends on how cooperative they want to be. If they fight us, could take 6 months to a year. If they're smart and accept the legal reality, we might get it sorted out in a couple months. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you keep living in your house, keep running David's business if you want to, and don't let anybody pressure you into signing anything or agreeing to any kind of settlement. This is your home, your livelihood, your inheritance under Louisiana law. Armed with Buddy's legal knowledge and a folder full of succession law precedents, I drove back to Miss Eleanor's house. Sarah's rental car was still in the driveway, and I could see them through the kitchen window, heads together over coffee cups, talking real intense about something. I walked right in without knocking. After 15 years of marriage to her son, I figured I had that privilege. We need to talk, I announced, slamming Buddy's business card down on the kitchen counter hard enough to make their coffee cups rattle. All 3 of us, right now. Miss Eleanor looked at the business card and frowned. Marie, there's no need to bring lawyers into family business. We can work this out among ourselves like civilized people. Funny thing about family business, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without being invited. Turns out, Louisiana law has some pretty strong opinions about how family business gets handled when somebody dies intestate. David didn't die intestate, Sarah protested. He left a will. We just read it to you. Y'all read me something, all right. Question is whether it's a real will or just some paper somebody typed up to try and steal a widow's inheritance. The color started draining from both their faces, but Miss Eleanor tried to bluff it out. That will is perfectly legal. I told you Raymond Trosclair looked at it and said, Raymond Trosclair practices real estate law and writes contracts for car dealerships. I interrupted. When's the last time he handled a succession case? Because Buddy Thibodeau handles them every week, and he says y'all's will violates about 6 different sections of Louisiana Civil Code. Sarah was fidgeting with her coffee spoon, wouldn't meet my eyes. Marie, what are you trying to say? I'm saying that will is either fake, illegal, or both. I'm saying David couldn't leave everything to you even if he wanted to, which I seriously doubt he did. And I'm saying somebody in this room has been lying to me about what really happened between you and my husband. Miss Eleanor puffed up like an angry rooster. Are you calling us liars? I'm calling y'all exactly what you are. Now, Sarah, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth about your relationship with David. And don't give me any more of that emotional support bullshit. Sarah finally looked up from her coffee cup, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt, yes, but also defiance. Like she was tired of pretending and ready to tell the truth. Consequences be damned. Fine, Marie. You want the truth? Here's the truth. You weren't making David happy anymore. Y'all were fighting all the time about money, about your mama's medical bills, about the business, about everything. David was miserable in his own marriage, and he needed someone who actually understood him. Understood him how, Sarah? He was lonely, Marie. Lonely and frustrated and tired of coming home to arguments about bills and stress about work. When I moved back to Louisiana after my divorce, when I was going through my own hard time, David started calling me. Just to talk at first, just to have someone who'd listen without judging or complaining. The truth was starting to hit me like a slap in the face, but I needed to hear her say it. And then what happened? Then one thing led to another. It wasn't supposed to happen, Marie. Neither of us planned it. But David was so unhappy with you, and I was lonely after my divorce, and we just connected. Y'all were having an affair. Sarah nodded slowly, like she was relieved to finally admit it. For 3 years. And before you start acting all high and mighty about it, you need to understand that David was planning to leave you anyway. He was just trying to figure out the best way to do it. 3 years. 3 whole years of my sister sleeping with my husband while I was working overtime at the school, taking on tutoring jobs, helping David build his construction business, caring for my sick mama. 3 years of family dinners and birthday parties and Christmas mornings, with both of them lying to my face. And you knew about this? I asked Miss Eleanor, who was sitting there looking smug and satisfied like she'd just won the church bingo jackpot. I knew my son was miserable with you, she said, without a trace of shame. Sarah made him happy in ways you never could. She appreciated him, supported his dreams, didn't constantly nag him about money and responsibilities. So y'all cooked up this fake will to steal my inheritance? It's not stealing, Sarah said, getting defensive now. David wanted me to have those things. He bought that house on Barone Street for us, for our future together. He was going to leave you and start over with me. With money from our joint business accounts. With credit he established using our house as collateral. With the life insurance policies I helped pay for. The will is legal, Miss Eleanor insisted, but her voice didn't sound as confident as before. Raymond looked at all the paperwork and said everything was in order. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Your real estate lawyer friend must have gotten his succession law degree from the back of a Cracker Jack box. Louisiana doesn't recognize that kind of will when it comes to community property and forced heirship. I could see the doubt creeping into their faces now, the beginning of panic as they realized their plan might not be as foolproof as they thought. Marie, let's try to work this out as family, Sarah pleaded, switching back to her fake sweet voice. We don't have to fight about this in court. We can split everything fairly. You keep the house and I'll take the business and insurance money. No. I stood up, grabbed my purse, headed for the door. Here's what's going to happen instead. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing a petition to open David's succession in probate court. Every asset he owned is going to be properly inventoried and distributed according to Louisiana law, not according to some fake will y'all cooked up with bad legal advice. Marie, you can't do this to family, Miss Eleanor said. But the fight was going out of her voice. Family. I turned back one last time. Sarah stopped being my family the day she decided to screw my husband. And you stopped being my family the day you decided to help her steal my inheritance. Y'all want to talk about family? Real family doesn't lie and cheat and steal from each other when tragedy strikes. 8 weeks later, Buddy had straightened out the whole legal mess. The fake will was thrown out by Judge Boudreau after about 15 minutes of testimony. David's succession was settled according to Louisiana Civil Code, which meant I inherited everything that was rightfully mine as his surviving spouse. The house, the business, the life insurance, even half of that Barone Street, property that David bought with our community, funds for his love nest with Sarah. Turns out Louisiana's community property laws are pretty clear about spouses who try to give away marital assets to their girlfriends. Sarah slunk back to Houston, with her tail between her legs, and Miss Eleanor moved in with her sister in Slidell. Haven't heard from either of them since the final court hearing. I'm doing okay now, better than okay, actually. Still miss David something fierce. 15 years of marriage don't just disappear because your husband turned out to be a cheating bastard. But I don't miss wondering why he seemed so distant those last few years, or why my sister and mother-in-law were always whispering together at family gatherings. Sometimes the truth hurts worse than the lies, but at least you know where you stand. And knowing where you stand is the first step toward figuring out where you want to go next. Y'all, if there's one lesson I learned from this whole nightmare, it's that family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. The people who really love you don't try to steal from you when you're grieving. They bring you casseroles and hold your hand and help you figure out how to keep living when your world falls apart. That's the kind of family worth having. That's the kind of family I'm building now, one genuine friendship at a time.